Hello, Spokane. Phil Tyler.
Meg Demand.
And welcome to Colorful Conversations. Today I thought we would talk about spaces and places and how that impacts an interracial or biracial couple or just black folks and white folks in general. And we talk about this today because you brought up an interesting thing that I really didn't realize, that you witnessed some different changes in my behavior when you invited me out to your parents or to the lake or the lake cabin, those kind of things. Talk about that.
Yeah, so when we were first dating and when I took you out to mom and dad's, so they live out in the country by Spangle, and as you get closer to your house, it gets more wheat fields, it gets more to be more trees, less houses, less people, yeah. And you would kind of fidget around in the car seat, and I would be like, why is he acting so weird? And I thought maybe it was just the country boy, city boy thing. But as we talked about it more, it was more than that for you. So for Philip, and what he said to me, and I just found this so compelling, is that you said, hey Meg, you have to realize when I see pictures of my ancestors in trees and things like this, I've seen my ancestors hanging from these trees. And I was just so blown away by that. And I thought, wow, I didn't even think of that. Because the country, to me, has such a different meaning. It means freedom. It means me running around and doing whatever I want, bare feet. And my friend that I grew up with, Jeannie, her and I would just go everywhere and not worry about one thing.
Yeah.
And it's very different for you. And then... just to continue on with that, so then Mom would invite you to Priest Lake in the summers, and now to Hayden Lake. They spend some time out at both of those. And so as we're driving to these places, Philip's like, do you have a full tank of gas? And so that one time we went to Hayden Lake, I had to get gas on the way there because you were just, and I had a half a tank of gas, but you were like, nope, we need to fill up because we're not stopping anywhere. Because we're out of gas. And I just thought, that is so weird, but it is so true. So
it is weird to you, but to me there's historical context to it as well. You talked about running through the trees being free and freedom, etc. We have always been, black people have always been historically connected to the outdoors. You think about Harriet Tubman and the Underground Railroad. She's navigating through the outdoors in the forest, sometimes at night, having to navigate the weather and etc. without these skill sets that were taught to her in university. You think about the Buffalo Soldiers, right? They were some of our very first park rangers. But our connection to the outdoors and all that goes even further back. We talk about 40 acres and a mule. After the Civil War. When I think it was General Sherman granted this special order number 15, as I recall, that every freed person was entitled to 40 acres and a mule. Well, after President Lincoln was killed, obviously President Johnson took over and he rescinded that rule. So, the feeling of outdoors, the feeling of freedom and open spaces was stripped away from us. Then you add on top of that Jim Crow laws that occurred during a time when my parents were existing and living. And some of those laws, there was obviously racist and segregationist, but sometimes those laws were enforced by the rope. And by the rope meant taking a black man or woman out to the woods and hanging them. There's this poignant poem called Between the World and Me, and I don't recall the author, but the premise of the poem is, I encourage you guys to look that poem up and read through it and feel the historic hurt and pain associated with this subject we're talking about. The premise of the poem is this. A black man wanders out into the woods to reconnect with nature and the free spaces like you discussed, and he finds this charred body hanging from a tree. Obviously it's a black male. It was. And he sees these burnt cigarettes and cigars around the body, and he starts to just envelop all of the feelings that this person must have went through and seeing it through their eyes. And when you read this poem and when you hear these stories that are passed down generation to generation, including from my parents to me, it creates this angst and fear about the woods. And it wouldn't be as bad if we didn't see those kind of things occurring in today's society as well, right? We go back to James Byrd being drugged behind a pickup truck in Texas and dismembered. We just last year, right? We heard the stories about surviving living while black, camping while black, Barbecue Becky, right? Barbecuing while back in the public park. You know, we had the couple that had the gun pulled on them in the KOA campground just for being there. So when you're saying, hey, let's go out to these woods, particularly Hayden Lake, who has a rich, I'm using that term not in a positive way, history of segregation and racism with Aryan nations, of course I wouldn't feel comfortable with going on there. But you have the ability to say, my experience has always been positive. Yeah. But of course it has.
And
right?
I could understand your trepidation just from us talking and everything, but Mom and Dad were just like, we don't understand why there would be any, you know, the Hayden Lake compound is gone and all that kind of stuff. But it's still there for, I mean.
Yeah, the compound is gone, but there still might be those existing in that space having those same feelings, and I wouldn't know unless I was confronted by them. And I surely don't want to be confronted by them out in the woods or at a lake where there's no other people that look like Phil around there. I mean, I don't travel to those spaces with just you and I. I carry a third person with me. Code switching, I would call that Nina. For those out there that understand what that means, it would be a 9mm pistol on my hip. But that's really here nor there. But that's just a reality of how I have to exist in those spaces. Right. But I always like to look at these issues from both lenses, right? I might be uncomfortable in those spaces because you assume it is comfortable and welcoming and accepting. But if I bring you to a Black Student Union event at Gonzaga or a poetry slam in a local community where there's more people that look like me than you feel uncomfortable and I see a change in your behavior. Speak to that.
Well, just being the minority. I mean, I'm not used to being the minority. Unfortunately, not that you ever get used to being the minority, but for the majority of the events that we attend and the events that I put on, you are the only Black person in the room most of the time.
Sure, yeah.
But in those circumstances, I think
what makes you feel concerned? What gives you the angst?
Just being the only minority in the room and not, for me, it's not about, I'm not worried about the rope and things like that. I'm worried about saying the wrong things and upsetting somebody.
Getting called out or canceled
and
culture.
Offending. I mean, that is a huge deal these days. So, I mean, but it's not going to make me code switch and all of a sudden talk all like I wouldn't normally talk. And so... But
the understanding that because you are the minority in that space, there's a different feeling. And that's all our conversation was about, right?
I mean, I sit around, and I'm very curious, so I stare, and you tease me about that. You're like, quit staring at people. Yes. But it's just so interesting to me because I want to know more about people. But
absolutely, yeah.
It's also a place where I feel like I have tried to put myself in those uncomfortable spaces to get myself more used to that.
But again, you say uncomfortable, but what is the discomfort level? And this is great while we're having this conversation, why we're sharing this with you, because if you feel uncomfortable because you're the minority, imagine what I feel like on a day-to-day basis. So you shouldn't, or anyone out there shouldn't assume that inviting me to these spaces that you have a level of comfort in because you are the majority doesn't automatically make me feel comfortable. And that's all we're trying to do in this conversation is express that. Don't stop inviting us to those spaces. We want to be a part of that. There might be some that love to go out to those spaces, hunting, camping, and fishing, all those kind of things. All I'm suggesting is understand that there may be a different level of comfort to that.
Right.
You expressed it. I've expressed it. So that's what we're trying to do. Make sure that there isn't this belief set based on privilege, right, or majority, that I would like something or like the space or places that you go to because it's always been great and a symbol of freedom and those kind of things for you.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I like to tell you that a lot. You'll love this. And
sure.
Like, well, I love it.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's
and same thing applies to you,
with
right?
Yeah.
Oh, you love the Poetry Slam or the BSU, and you have enjoyed those experiences, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and
but there's no danger to me. So one of the things that I find interesting about lynching is that, and I didn't realize that most of the lynchings happened after the abolishment of slavery.
Oh, yes.
And so
yes.
This isn't like, that's not, when we talk about your ancestors hanging from trees,
not hundreds of years
necessarily
old. Right.
all in slavery times.
Sure.
It was after that.
Yeah.
So, anyways. Yeah.
But anyway, so the conversation is good because it makes me reflect on maybe you have a level of discomfort, and it also makes you reflect that I have a level of discomfort. And we hope that this engages conversations that may start out uncomfortable, but it brings a level of comfort once you start engaging in those conversations and understanding why with context,
Well, it's
there might be some
awareness, and
concern.
it's me seeing through your lens. It's also like my parents now
Huge.
look a little bit more through your lens.
Huge.
They understand a little bit more.
And I through your lens.
Why? Right. Yeah.
So, well, we appreciate you sharing a little time in our living room. You've seen we relocated our location. So this is Phil Tyler, a black man.
And Meg Demand, a white woman.
And we'll see you next time on Colorful Conversations.